What does it take to make workshops work? And how can we actually facilitate collaboration that sticks and leads to results? My name is Miriam Hapness, and it is my mission to help you to make workshops work. Today with me on the show is Matt. Matt Kelly works as a business designer for DoTank, and we are talking about facilitating at scale. So what is the difference in terms of skill set and organization when you design and facilitate a very large workshop with 100 plus participants? Hello, Matt.
Hello, Miriam. How are you?
I am very well.
Good.
I am
very happy to be here.
Happy to have you on the show today, joining in from early morning Chicago.
That's right. It's about 7:30 a.m. here. Overcast. Autumn weather has finally arrived. It's a little chill in the air, but a lovely day.
Nice. And today we're going to speak about facilitating large events.
Yes. Yeah, something that we've been doing. Yeah, our roots are doing more, I think modest size events. You're kind of 10, 20 people, but we've been doing them for hundreds of people recently.
Awesome. And before we're getting there, I would first be curious just to learn a little bit more about you and also give the audience the chance to learn about you. So you're now a consultant, a partner and business designer at DoTank. I love the name as opposed to think tank, and maybe you're going to share the story behind it. And you call yourself a design thinker. So I would be curious, how did you end up calling yourself a design thinker, and how do you apply it for business design?
Well, I blush first off at the end, so I call myself a design thinker. So I think the practice that we do is that I don't introduce myself that way, but it's certainly the nature, I think, of the work that we do, which I think many of your audience will be familiar with, which is starting with the people that you serve and understanding the outcomes that you're trying to achieve, and then working from there rather than starting with your capabilities, the things you're good at, and trying to figure out how to force that perspective onto the world. So I do think that design thinking kind of approach does kind of underpin all the work that we do. And as you said, you're right on with the thinking behind the brand. DoTank is the idea of moving to action rather than just thinking. Maybe we'll talk about this later in terms of workshops and facilitation, but workshops have a bad reputation for a lot of people of being, for some, as brutal as a waste of time, and for others just like a good time spent. But once they're over, there's not a lot of connection to the real world. So it is a branding effort of ours, but it's also a sincere philosophy that we try to connect with the work that we do with people to action planning, to critical next steps, to even getting them out of the building if necessary during the time that we spend together. So the doing is a key part of our DNA.
So how important is then the doing in terms of business design when you come to that? Because at first you need to design something. I guess it's a business model process.
Right.
How much are you involved in the doing at the end?
Depends on their appetite and budget in terms of how involved we are in the doing. But at the very least, we try to prepare them for doing it themselves. I'd say in most cases, Miriam, we have the work that we do is more on the end of the spectrum of kind of light touch, high impact than, embedded, we're going to take over a corner office. We're not that kind of consultancy. So we're always working with teams to help them do things themselves. Right? So, but we will be involved, for example, let's say you design a new business model, product, service, pitch, really anything that you build is open for testing. So some kind of interaction with customers, the marketplace, whatever. So sometimes we'll be involved with folks early on to design those experiments and come up with a plan to engage with the real world, and then check in, coach, help them kind of iterate and adjust and process the things that they've learned. So we're usually not like doing all of that for them, but we're supporting and coaching them on their journey, which I think has a lot of utility for them as well. We work with teams that, hey, they're the experts. These are brilliant people that really know their space. They know their customers. And I think in most cases, you're not necessarily doing a great service to your team by just completely outsourcing the field testing, for example. Having them involved, I think, is critical just for the maintenance of your own culture and respect for the capabilities of the people that ultimately need to own the project. So to a long-winded answer to your question about how involved are we in the doing, some of it's, by design and intent that we're not completely involved. And other times we're not as involved as we'd like to be because, budget and other real world constraints kind of limit that involvement.
Yeah. What I hear is also not only the thinking process, but then having a prototype, for instance, that they can actually test. So you're producing something tangible.
Yes, that's really important. And I think an outcome of most of the work that we do, because most of the work that we do is inventive in nature. People are building something, even if it's just a story and something, even if the thing they're building is intangible, there's still kind of tangible artifacts that will support the telling of that story, and you still have to build it.
Yeah. And when you say story, it reminds me that I read about you that you have an undergrad degree in literature and language.
Yes.
So how do you still use maybe your learnings from back then?
And it just kind of happens. I'm not sure that it happens very explicitly, like, okay, today I'm going to apply, the study I did of 19th century literature or anything like that. But I think just some of the tools and skills that you build through that kind of thinking have certainly come through. I did study literature, and I was involved in the theater for, I think quite actively involved for about 8 years, even after college graduation. Wow. So I was in a number of productions and plays and helped set design and stuff. So I had these, I guess, artistic kind of background that I never thought would really be applied, but you find them kind of creeping up. And that's just part of my personal story. Every facilitator, workshop leader, et cetera, has a rich background of experiences that can kind of reveal themselves, some of those skills that you build over time in strange ways,
Yeah, or less strange ways. And I guess that the storytelling aspect, or the ability to think in stories, might be quite helpful for your job as a business designer.
Yeah, I think it has. I to be honest with you, I don't think I've really reflected on it very much. So I'm doing it in real time with you right now. But in terms of like how that background might kind of manifest and contribute to the work that I do, and no, I think you're absolutely right. That idea when you're building, and when we say stories, it can be product pitches, right? It can be, trying to convince somebody of a point of view. So storytelling, is a big word, but it pops up constantly. I mean, in business and in like real everyday business. So it's a necessary skill that always comes up. But yeah, thinking about the flow and the rhythm, being aware of your audience and thinking about the impact you're trying to generate, taking inspiration from, other storytellers, if you will. So you're not reinventing the wheel. You can really get better at it quicker. So absolutely, I think it has had quite an impact on that.
So if you had to summarize yourself into one hashtag, what would you be?
Oh boy. Well, I think about it, I guess, related to the work that I do. So this might not be super personal, but I do think of invention and storytelling comes to mind since it's top of mind. The idea that what we do is we're almost always helping people create things. So all the workshops, the coaching, the interactions, the on-site stuff we do, it seems, as I think about it, that people are always creating something. And so that's where the invention comes in. And I think what I try to do when I facilitate and try to add value to those conversations is to help encourage folks to be more inventive, more creative, think outside the box. I think that's an essential part of the value that we bring as an organization that I personally try to deliver. So invention's one hashtag, and then storytelling for the reasons we just discussed, I think is always part of it. You can build the most beautiful, elegant thing, but if you can't persuade someone else and other folks that there's value in that, well, maybe it's not so great.
Yeah, see that. So when you say that the invention part, it's your role to help the groups to think outside the box and to invent. How do you spark that? How do you trigger this creativity in a group?
That's a great question. I think having good tools helps. That's very on the ground, but great design canvases can really go a long way. So we use a lot of design canvases. So you think Osterwalder's business model canvas and stuff with the Grove. We've produced a bunch of tools ourselves. Reflecting with some of my colleagues, we've become more of a tool and die shop rather than just a tool using shop lately. We're constantly building new things, and I take great joy in doing that work. So, but having the right tools, because what these design canvases are, and I say this every day, they're simple structures to hold complex conversations. People have the creativity in themselves, and especially when you put people in groups, just human dynamics, they can inspire each other. So you don't have to be heavy-handed is the point that I'm trying to make. You don't have to be. Sometimes I find myself, and this is where I'm evolving as someone that runs workshops and runs groups. Sometimes I do find myself in kind of football coach or baseball coach or something where I'm like in the locker room trying to, inspire people, carpe diem, this is your chance, and sometimes you have some really people that are into it, and sometimes you get blank faces staring back at you. So sometimes there is a little bit of that. I think you got to be able to read the room. Sometimes you do have to take your own energy and inspiration and put it out there, and have, hopefully that can spark something in other folks. But a lot of times people will spark each other. And I think that's the art of someone that does really well at it. And that's certainly not me all the time. I have my moments, but when I see, great facilitators and stuff, they're able to really just bring the best out of people and help them get the most out of each other, facilitate each other, inspire each other, and that sort of thing. And a lot of that can be made more possible in the way that you design events in advance. So I know a lot of your audience are facilitators, people that run workshops and things like that. And so much of the skill goes in the design of the agenda. It occurs before the workshop ever starts. And it's understanding the people in the room, the physical space. How are they going to move around? I know myself, I want pictures of the room. I want to know where the seats are going to be. This is crowd dynamics, and you can't force people to behave in certain ways. People are complicated. They're not programmable, but you can create the conditions under which certain outcomes are more likely. And that's really kind of knowing your space, what you're trying to achieve, and having the right kind of exercises and approach that is fit for the purpose that you have in mind. And that's something that, we always have to try to tell our clients a little bit. It's like probably just about any job. People that have never done it don't necessarily appreciate the work and the expertise that goes into certain parts that are behind the curtain. So that's a big part of the value anyway. And then some clients really get that. And if you can get them involved in that design process, I'm going off on a tangent here, Miriam. I hope that's okay.
That's awesome. Please continue.
If you can get that client involved in that design process, you'll enhance their appreciation for what really goes into it, which will therefore enhance their sense of value in terms of what you bring to the table. And you'll also set the foundation for having a real ally in the room. Someone that's going to understand it, that's not just going to be like, I don't know what's coming next. I'm with you, the rest of the folks in the room. So it is important, if possible, to get that sponsor, if you will, involved somewhat in advance.
And this brings me to a question. So you mentioned the importance of the canvases to spark this creativity and invention, and that you're now more moving into the actual design of canvases. And I think that's very interesting and will be the perfect lead then to our other topic. And still, I wonder, how can you combine it to remain individual for one sponsor, especially when you want them to be part of the design process? And on the other hand, having maybe more standardized canvases and workshop designs? Yeah.
So I guess I'll take a stab at this in this way. Even if you use the same dozen canvases every time, right? I'm no mathematician, but what are the number of possibilities in which you can order and group those things, right? So the design of the agenda, even if it has familiar components or common components in every case, you can still create something that's quite unique based on what you choose and also the order. So we are quite experimental in that way. Basically, every workshop we do has at least some degree of, we've invented a little twist on this. We're going to change the way that people share out. We're constantly experimenting with those things. So when you're designing the session, there are a lot of these little key, potentially magical moments outside of just, you've got 20 minutes to do the business model, go, right? So there are more moving parts than might meet the eye. So you at first glance. So my point being that you can use common ingredients and create many different dishes, I guess.
Absolutely. And when you say that you experiment or you can vary the way that participants are sharing, can you give an example?
Yeah. We've been doing more of this very much lately. So it's present for us. You know what stinks for a facilitator is when you do, everyone stand up and has 5 minutes and presents, because we see it every day. I mean, if we're not engaged and interested, then, so we need to do some kind of service to ourselves to keep it interested.
It's difficult to fake it. Yes, I agree.
Yes. And I think it's not just for us. I think that most people in the audience, that's such a common structure for sharing now, right? Yeah. Go around the room, everybody take a chance. So we've been playing around with that. There's something that I'm positive it's not unique, but we call it internally hot potato. It was really, at least for us, it was inspired by Leslie Wainwright, who was doing some great work in healthcare and did a lot of work with our team. And in this way, we'd have people build, say, a value proposition. And then you would go and rotate and visit another team's work and have like a different colored Post-it note, and you could add things in the different colors. So you would experience the work that the other team did, but be able to interact with it.
Without them presenting it in the first place.
Without them presenting it. So you can't do that with every exercise, right? Something like value proposition design, where it's like pains, gains, jobs to be done, where it's just understanding a persona, right? Yeah. And you can go up, read the Post-it notes, and kind of the structure helps tell the story. It's a simple exercise in terms of the mechanics of it. So you don't necessarily need presentation. Something else that we do, we call it marketplace, and it's a pseudo, like almost like a trade show setup. So let's say, okay, I'm going to take a stab at this here. Let's say you have 3 teams, just for the sake of conversation, with 3 people on each team. So 3 teams of 3 people. Now the numbers are never that, but just as an example, you would say, okay, team A with the 3 people, one of you go to each of the 3 workstations, meaning one of you stay at the place where you did the work, and then the other 2 of you in the team go to the other 2 teams. So what you end up with are 3 teams that have 1 person from each of the 3 groups. And then you just rotate 3 times. And the rules are, when you're standing at your station, at the place where you did the work, you have to pretend it's a trade show booth, and you have 3 minutes to present the work to the other 2 people, and then they can ask questions. And so what you get from that is a much more interactive share out, and everybody in the room has an opportunity to present.
It's like a mini World Cafe.
Yeah, I think so. Yeah, but tell me more about that. So what's that? The
World Cafe?
Yeah.
Oh, I think it's maybe one of the most straightforward large group formats, where you have different tables, you have table hosts, and you have participants who would discuss at each table a different topic. And after each round, they would switch the table and then discuss a different topic with different participants. And usually you would use a tablecloth of paper, and then everyone can write notes on the tablecloth. So every time that you're sitting with a different group at a different table discussing a new topic, you can basically build on what has been discussed before by just reading what's written on the table.
Very cool. I've experienced as an attendee something like that, but I didn't know the kind of the facilitator.
Yeah, it's a quite
title.
Cool format.
Yeah, all right, I'll have to explore that.
And I like the dynamics of rotating and discussing new topics with different people each time.
Yeah, the rotation stuff is pretty powerful just from a human energy standpoint, It keeps the room alive.
Yeah, and each time we get new energy from new people, we hear different points of view that might inspire totally different ideas, perspectives again.
Yeah.
Yeah. So talking about canvases and standardization, shouts for large group events, right?
Yeah, and facilitating large group events, like the dynamics of that. Yeah, I can certainly.
What is for you the main difference between facilitating a small 15, 20 people workshop and a large 100 plus event?
Yeah, the main difference that comes to mind is the amount of attention that you can give as the host to each table is significantly less at these large events. So we've done them for 700 people, more or less, Now, that's not necessarily true. I mean, you can bring a facilitation army of 30 people and, so, I mean, technically it's not true, but I mean, that's not very efficient in terms of your investment. So you're probably going to have people that have to manage a much larger group than they're used to. So the big difference is you need to, for large events, your exercises probably need to be not too complicated mechanically, meaning can't be like, do this and then do this and that and split and do, but there's a real elegance and difficulty in creating something that seems very simple, right? It's like, just because it's simple doesn't mean that it's not beautiful in a minimalist sense, right? So there's a lot of work to create an elegant, inspiring exercise that does not have a lot of moving parts. So this is an audio podcast, so people won't be able to see this, but I'm raising my hand right now as if you would in a classroom. That is the design criteria that we always put on the experiences that we build for large events. We ask ourselves, will hands go up in the room after we explain the instructions? Because if that happens, you're in trouble.
Yeah.
With a small workshop, you might say, any questions? Anybody have it? No, you can't do that with a large people. So what you often have to do as well is have supporting materials. Like maybe you have a facilitator's guide on each table, maybe there's a cheat sheet. So there's additional physical artifacts that you can design and build that can help, the teams guide themselves. You have to be very clear, as you always do in a workshop, but be very clear about rules and roles and give the teams permission to be their own editors, to make choices. That really helps when you can kind of almost, this sounds like a cheap way out, but take the question of the table and put it back on them, meaning like, well, what do you think, right? So you need to empower groups to be your team, you're 6, 7, 8 people. Let's say you're at a round table, like at a conference, and there's 80 round tables, but there's 7 people at each table. You need to tell each group of 7 people is, you're an entrepreneurship team. Let's say they're strangers. You're a design team. You're together for a day. You're a new business. You own your own destiny. What we've created are a series of exercises and structures to help guide you, but you need to take ownership. So if you have fundamental questions like, what are we supposed to do here? If you can, answer it yourself, So that's part of in building a vibe and an energy in the room as well, which is generally great anyway, at conferences or workshops, is for people to really go for it. So another thing that happens for our experience at large events is, we're not an enormous team. So if there's 600 people in the room, plus a client may not want to pay for it, even if we did have the people, because we have associates and friends, and we could gather 20 amazing facilitators if we need to. That would not be a problem. But what we end up doing, it's actually part of the value proposition, is training some of their team to be facilitators.
This would have been my next question. Yeah.
And that, I think, is just super cool. So you might have, let's say, 20 people. They can be from anywhere in the organization, junior, senior, whatever, but most of them have never facilitated really like a meaningful size group before. Yeah, they facilitated a team meeting or something. So you need to kind of coach them in advance, tell them, give them some FAQs. These are some areas where you might have challenge. What do you do if you have a problem person? So we do training sessions with our core facilitation team. And by using the client's group, they get more value out of it because their team gets educated on facilitation methods. They learn design thinking. They have more meaningful, direct conversations with the guests, the clients, whoever's in attendance. So that's all incredible. But it also allows us to have more boots on the ground, more people, a better ratio of facilitator to attendees.
And a steering committee that actually the participants are running in the right direction. Because if they're internal, they know exactly what they aspire through the workshop.
Yes. Yeah. And that's a cool thing. So, because you give the facilitators, in this case, the host company's team, the opportunity to have some, authority and position of expertise. So you're building different relationships between the host and the guests.
I'm Rain. I'm from Experiential Learning. We facilitate programs for executives, and we use Session Lab because it's a very easy tool to design a meeting, easy to share with your colleagues, and get a script for the meeting in no time without too much hassle.
So visit sessionlab.com and find out more yourself. So what do you think is the key characteristic or mindset that you need in order to work in such a team? Because they haven't worked together before. You haven't worked with them. It's a lot of responsibility at such an event. It's incredibly stressful because having 600 people brainstorming, working together, it's a lot of energy and it's a messy happening.
Yeah. Well, the way that we do it, this sounds almost like military in its structure, is we kind of have tiers of management, captains and floor lieutenants and all that kind of thing. So we might have, and that's where like our team comes in, is we might have, say, let's just say that each client person has 4 tables. And then one of our teams would then kind of manage or be a resource for 4 of the clients' facilitators, therefore 16 tables at the end of the day. So there's always that outlet hatch for one of these kind of, let's call them rookie or greener facilitators, to be like, to come to me or one of my teammates and say, hey, this table's doing something. Can you talk to them? I'm struggling with them. So they have support. So they're not like totally exposed and on their own. They can escalate issues or challenges or even good things and be like, hey, they're having a really great conversation. You should come check it out and take some notes, because I know at the end of the day, you're gathering data for a report out or something.
If you were talking to your sponsor and he asked you, okay, we are about to select 20 of our colleagues to become these facilitators, what shall we look for in these people? What are the selection criteria?
That's a great question. I think some kind of baseline of natural ability, I think, for doing it, but I don't think it has to be like a ton. Like it's not like give us your 20 most social, outgoing people. That's not it at all. But people that are interested and so you definitely want people that want to do it. Ideally, you want people that want to do it. So I think that's one criteria. Another criteria is actually a selfish one for them. Who are the 20 people that are maybe rising performers? Maybe people that in their day job, learning some design thinking and facilitation skills will help them engage their own teams better. Who are the 20 people? It all depends on what you're trying to achieve. So it's still, your selection of who's a facilitator still aligns to your goals for what you're trying to get out of the conference. So let's say your conference is designed to deepen relationships with customers. Like that's a huge thing. We're going to invite 600 people and we want them to see us as a real strategic partner and be excited by how inventive we are, and they'll buy more stuff from us or whatever, right? Then who are the 20 people that maybe have business development responsibilities, where this becomes a forum for them to build real relationships face-to-face with people. So then after the event, they can say, hey, it was great working with you at the conference. Let's have a Skype. Let's get coffee. So you can be really strategic in how you select. It's not just based on the people. It's based on the outcomes that you're trying to achieve for the whole event.
And maybe then also those who are well connected within the organization so that they become ambassadors or disseminators of the outcomes.
Absolutely. I think that's really well put, this idea that there's an internal storytelling, if you will, that needs to happen as well. Even if you're not a huge organization, we've done them where the organization itself is 200 employees, they're hosting 1,000 people, but the organization employees, there's the great majority of the organization will be like, yeah, I guess there's this event you guys are doing. That sounds interesting, I guess, but I don't know much about it, So there's still it's not like all 200 people are involved in the design and the running of this event. So having those people that can internally tell the story, generate excitement, can be really great. Sometimes the executive sponsor, like the end of the road, the CEO, might barely know about the event, right? So if you're that, whether you're a VP or director, whoever you are, if you're the main kind of host for this big gathering, you want good news about this thing to travel up, left, right, within the team as well. So you're absolutely right. You would strategically pick from that 20, perhaps, people that will tell the story, if, assuming they have a good experience, of course, that will tell the story and be able to spread the word from their own experience internally as well as externally.
One thing that comes to my mind is that at these large events, and if you have 600 people, even 200, it's almost reminds me more of a festival than of a working session. So how can you make sure that the participants are actually taking it as seriously? Because of course it's nice to develop crazy ideas and to reach for the moon and all these kind of things. But at the end of the day, we need to generate tangible outcomes and results that we can work with. Yeah. Have you experienced a difference in terms of results, outcomes, and maybe seriousness between large and small events?
I would say not in general, because it depends on the events. To be honest, let me put it this way. Some events with 300 people are really small workshops just at a larger scale, meaning you might have each table be an actual team. So let me give you an example. So we have an event that we're designing right now that's going to occur in November. It's for this group that's sponsoring 18 health organizations. They're giving them an award, coaching, and it's a 2-year journey. And they're gathering these 18 organizations in a couple of months. So we're designing a series of 5 exercises for them to get off to a good start, understand the program, etc. So this is not 600 people, it's more like 150. But the teams, each of the 18 teams are going to have multiple stakeholders because they're about community-based partnerships. So there might be like a public health organization and a hospital coming together. And one of the exercises, for example, is a team chartering exercise. So what values do we hold in common? What are our shared goals? How do we want to work together? Basically, getting a partnership off to a good start by aligning on agreed principles. And we're just doing this 18 times. So if we had 2 teams in attendance, we would do the same exact work. We're just doing it at a larger scale. So we still want to build the exercises in a way that are kind of intuitive and that can endure less of a raise your hand and ask questions kind of dynamic. But the work to be done is like real work. It's not like, hey, but sometimes you also do have conferences where, hey, we're 600 people from all around the country and let's just have a good time and inspire each other and get to know each other. One of the great outcomes of this is there's no better networking than working on a shared problem. So you could have a conference where that's just what you want. You don't want like strategic plans that people are going to take home and necessarily initiate. You want to inspire and you want to be the catalyst of new relationships forming. So by having a shared experience, you can really facilitate that. Yeah. So it all goes back to the outcomes. It always starts with the end. What are you trying to achieve? And if what you're trying to achieve is something that you suggest that's really durable and it's like a real plan and something that you can move to action, we can build something that goes towards that. It all depends on what you're trying to achieve.
And then also to be honest and transparent in communicating it. So if it's all about the shared experience and networking, don't let the participants think that they're working on a joint solution that might be implemented and then won't.
Yes, you do have to manage expectations. It's true, because then things can really backfire, right? So this is actually, I think, a pretty key point. When you have a conference or a large event, that large event is just one key moment of many over a longer relationship journey that you have with your guests. And if you don't follow through on things you say you're going to do at that conference, then you're going to take what was a really great experience and turn it into something that's really bad, because that experience doesn't end at the close of the event. It's one of the biggest things, and most event people totally 100% get this, right? They always talk about post-event engagement before engagement, but sometimes, that's something that you need to really talk about is when we do event work, and this is where it's not just like, hey, just doing a workshop at scale. We think with the client very deeply about how do we engage them beforehand? What are the marketing materials? How do we prep them? How do we tease some of the topics that we're going to discuss? How do we build excitement? And again, that depends on event to event. Some events actually, people pay tickets to attend as individuals. Well, you're going to have a different campaign for that. You're going to want to basically sell it. Versus other events, you've got a captive audience of we're inviting our top 200 internal employees or whatever, and then it's a different job to be done. In terms of what happens, to go back to your previous question about like how serious are the outputs and how you use the outputs, the post-event engagement is absolutely critical. So what we've done in a number of our events is, and it's the classic tools of Post-it notes and markers and some of these exercises, right? You might build a 42-inch diameter canvas that fits on a table, but people are still kind of putting down data, right? So each Post-it note is really just a data point. We've entered every single Post-it note written. I mean, we've hired administrative support to do it. So I have done it personally, although I've done a lot of data entry on it, but we've thousands and thousands of Post-it notes. And then you crunch the data. And that allows you to tell a story and play back to your attendees an experience after the event, which continues the engagement long after they go home and they've forgotten about, the great food they had and the cool people they had. So what you do after the event is at least as important as what you do during the event.
I totally agree. And I had actually a conversation a few days ago with Mireille, and when we talked about how to follow up and follow through and how to document. And this was exactly it, because if nobody looks at the results, how do you want to work with the outcomes of the workshop anyway? And I think especially in such a large event, because you don't even have the time, space for every table to really summarize what happened. How would you actually do that? If you have such a large event, how do you inform everyone about each other's output? Or is it maybe not relevant?
Personally, I think the idea that everybody has to know what everybody else is doing is overrated myself. And I have clients, that's a very common thing that I hear from clients. Like, but everyone hasn't shared with everybody. Everyone hasn't shared. So now I'm just being, and we can accommodate that. Hey, if that's what you want to do, fine. But I personally believe a lot more in quality over quantity. Mm-hmm. And that means with 10, 20 people really getting to know their work and seeing it rather than getting some vague sniff of what 600 people have been working on, I would way rather take the former. That being said, the way that you can tell everybody what everybody's worked on, and this is important, it doesn't have to be in the room. That can be in the post-event data. 34% of teams said that this is the number one thing that you should be aware of when you're working on a healthcare challenge. 85% of people that the number one best practice for forming a powerful community-based partnership is X. So that's where you can, after the event, take all the data and actually report out common themes that you saw across the 600 people. In the room itself, time is limited. Sometimes the sessions we do are plenary sessions of much broader conferences. Like you said, they're like a festival, right? So, 1,000 people gather for 2 hours and then they spread out to all these breakout groups, right? So we have them for a limited period of time. We don't want to spend all that time sharing out. It's kind of like in a regular workshop when some people want to spend, an hour and a half doing introductions. That's just not my style. It's like, you get to learn and meet and understand people by working on it together, not just kind of like talking at each other. So, sorry, I know I sound a little harsh here, but I fight this battle a lot.
I like it.
I feel a little passionate about the share out.
It's good.
I think sharing out's important, but I'd rather have fewer really deep share outs, because even from a networking perspective, right, which is often a big outcome for people at large events. People often confuse quantity, again, with quality of relationships built. You might collect 100 business cards, right, at an event, and you follow up 2 weeks later, and how many of those will be a chat or coffee? Maybe a handful. Versus if you get 15 business cards from people that you spent like some real time getting to know by working on a shared challenge, then you're much more likely to have 10 real relationships out of the 15 versus, you know what I mean?
Absolutely. And you actually have something to talk about when you reach out, because you have data, you have a story to refer to, and you have some shared experience that you can build upon instead of just, oh, your business or your role sounds interesting. I mean, who wants to connect with someone who's just interested in your role? Yes, absolutely. You nailed it. I mean, you have a shared story. You have something in common because you did something together, rather than the thing you have in common is that you were at the same place at the same time. Yeah. I'm really curious how you present then the outcome. So I imagine that you have your students or administrators who put in all the post-it notes into a system. And then would you have word clouds? Do you count keywords, or would you cluster them by topics?
Yeah, that's done in different ways. So it depends on the insights you're trying to gather. I am not a data scientist, so I can't speak with the greatest detail about this. But yeah, one thing you can do is just so you can count the total numbers and say X% said this. There often is a clustering step that comes after the pure data entry and the pure data and the insights, and that's clustering. Like, these words are kind of part of this same theme, and these are kind of part of this theme, because it depends on the nature. What you get from a data perspective, what you get out is only as good as what people put in. And what I mean by that is how you structure the exercise. You have to think about the data that comes out at the end. This is another one of those nuances of tool design that people don't often think of. It might look very simple, but you need to think about what you're going to do with what comes out of it. So how you structure the questions on the thing that people are putting their post-it notes on, you have to think about what stories or what insights do I want to gather after, when you're building the thing before, if that makes any sense, because that allows your data to be more coherent and aligned and something that you can do things with. That being said, a lot of times stuff that we do is kind of open-ended in terms of what people write on Post-its. So they're not just selecting, pick 1 through 5, what's your favorite, like survey style data. It's not that clean. You know, people might write their own thing. So then you have to kind of cluster and find common themes. And then in terms of the insights you gather, there's lots of different things that you can do with the data. Again, you can do numbers. You can do things that we'll often do is just, hey, here's 40 new ideas. These are the 10 that we think are actually really exciting, and just like kind of tell that story. So that's not a very hard quantitative system. That's just a selection process. And the way that we deliver it after, one thing that we're very fortunate with our organization is we have incredible visual designers. I mean, real artists that make beautiful playbooks and one-pagers and things. So then we have this great data, we have these great insights that come from it, and we're able to then tell the story in some really visually compelling ways.
Awesome. This would have been my question. To what extent it actually makes sense to put it into pictures? Because then I think it also forces the group to really align and decide, is this what we actually meant? Are these the pictures? Is this the story that stands behind the words?
Right. Yeah, and when you're telling that story of the data, you can also be telling the story of the experience that they had at the same time. So we're building something. We built a playbook for a previous event that the teams used to facilitate themselves. So it was the playbook, meaning how they did it. And now we're building the replay book, which is a look back at the experience. And it's a fusion of the instructions for all the exercises. So it's the playbook. So it's reminding them of the experience they had in the day. And then spliced into that, it's all the data and the outcomes from each of the exercises that they did. So there's a combination of photographs and artwork. So it's a visual format kind of thing that brings people to the moment, but also, so it hits their head and their heart, ideally. That's the goal. And the post-event stuff, it all goes back to the same question, is it's all about, you start with what are you trying to achieve? Sometimes we've had a goal before where you speculate. So let's say an attendee came and you gave them a deliverable, a sizzle reel video, a playbook, whatever it is. What do you want them to do? That's the question. Do you want them to go out and start a new project based on the data? Do you want them to reach out and come to your website and buy something or ask you for help? Do you want them to take that playbook that you sent them and walk right to their CEO's office and say, check this out, right? So you ask those questions, and that helps influence the design, because the design has built into it an ask of the viewer, an ask of the audience, and a suggestion, very often explicitly in the front, of what's the best way to use this material. What do we want you to do with it? So that same thing goes with the questions that you ask of the data. What do we want to learn, to what end?
Yeah. And what was the purpose of the gathering in the first place?
Yes.
What do you think makes a large-scale workshop fail?
Oh God, so many things. Acts of God, lightning striking, planes not coming, canvases not arriving. In all seriousness, Miriam, there's significant anxiety about stuff, right?
Yeah.
You're shipping large canvases and post-it notes. There's a lot of supplies and people going to one spot. So there's always that basic anxiety. But from a more kind of experiential standpoint, what can make it fail? Confusion in direction, confusion in purpose. Yes, exactly. The hand going up.
Yeah.
But in a sense, Miriam, a lot of the things that can make a large workshop fail are the same things that can make a small workshop fail.
Mm-hmm.
And a really, really big one that I found is not setting climate and rules and roles in advance. Not saying in the beginning, these are the rules of engagement. This is how we're going to work together. This is how we expect you to facilitate each other. That's a really big one for a large event, is you need to set the conditions and tell people how they need to facilitate each other, because you don't have the same ability to be embedded. You can't come up to a problem table necessarily and say, cool, I'm just going to take an empty chair and just get my nose in it, because you have too many people that you're responsible for. So that's a big one. In a large workshop, you need to create the conditions under which people can facilitate themselves.
Can you just explain in a nutshell what you mean by that?
So I'll give you an example. So this large thing that we did recently, it's called the Solve-thon. It was in the healthcare space for the American Hospital Association. And we had these design teams, and they were, 6, 7, 8 people per team, about 30 teams in the room. So, and we had the playbook manager, we had the timekeeper, and we had the scribe. So we had 3 very specific roles that before we even started, 3 people in the team had to be, I'll be the timekeeper, I'll be the playbook manager, I'll be the scribe. And we defined in the book that they had what that role meant. And the way we defined it gave permission for people to act in a certain way. So for the timekeeper, for example, we said in the book, your timekeeper might have to jump in the middle of a sentence and say, we have to move on. It's important that you give them permission to cut you off. So we need to create the ability for people to behave in maybe abrupt ways for the service of the thing.
Yeah, and then so you define special rules that apply to the event and give permission to the people to just act upon them. I really like that. Thank you.
Yeah, you're welcome. Yeah, no, that's one way of doing it. So it's interesting when we think about the facilitators of the team, the 20 people that are the non-professional facilitators. We've actually got facilitators within the guests as well. So so the facilitation structure, it has layers to it. And so there's guest facilitators, there's novice facilitators from the host site, there's professional facilitators from the designers, from ourselves, and they all have slightly different roles, but woven together, there's a net that can hopefully prevent things from falling apart. I do think there's still that challenge, and this is where things can escalate to us, and this is where our role comes in, and everybody who's ever run a workshop or ever been to a workshop knows this person, and that's the dominant voice, the person that just takes control, and they just won't shut up, and they won't, that kind of thing. They're always a challenge to manage for folks like that, but you try to create, have a couple of ways of approaching them.
What I think is interesting when you explain what makes a large workshop fail is that it's more about logistics and about the timing and making sure that everything is easily to understand, and then you less rely on the ability of the single facilitator, because you don't have to be flexible, because there's no space for flexibility anyway. And actually you don't want them to be flexible, because you cannot have one facilitator just suddenly deciding to be flexible with his or her table.
That's absolutely right. And I've actually seen that sometimes you certainly have to manage those facilitators, because some facilitators will be, and it might be inspired by a really great thing. They'll get so involved with one table's discussion that the other 3 tables they're responsible for are completely left alone. So you can't just go off, you hit the nail on the head. It's essentially the biggest difference between a large workshop and a small workshop is a large workshop is far more structured.
Yeah. And maybe you want to work then with facilitators who are actually not that professional, because they will not fall back into their routines of, let's do it flexibly, and I know my job and I'm a professional, so I do it my way. So you really want them to, coming back to your example with the military, you want them to obey and to go by the rules in the playbook, right?
To a certain degree. It's funny you say that because, oh my God, the worst violator of the kind of the facilitator responsibility within the large workshop context by far was a very experienced facilitator. It was this guy, great facilitator. He went to one of his tables and he took a seat and he sat down with a table, and he was responsible for like 5 tables. And he just sat at this one table, and I had to like pull him out of the table. Absolutely. Oh, it's so, and it goes for all of us, when you're doing things in your own domain of expertise and interest, and someone else is all of a sudden managing you resist, right? Because you have your own experience, you think you know what's right. And so you're right, maybe just having a bunch of kind of rookies that you can kind of mold for a really pointed and specific purpose is better in some sense.
Yeah, awesome. If someone fell asleep after minute 2 of our conversation, just woke up and like, I don't have time to listen to the entire show. What is the nutshell that he or she should know?
Oh boy. I think setting the rules and roles and climates of a workshop or a gathering are incredibly important. What you do after the gathering is at least as important as what you do in attendance. Start with the end. So before you start building anything, whether it's a large workshop or even a smaller one, be very clear about what you're trying to achieve. And when you have clarity about your vision and your goals, then the rest will more likely fall in place. And appreciate that the amount of work that goes into the design before the event or gathering, there's real, art and ability in finding the right way to build that experience. And that includes space and seating and all of these details that you may think are incidental are actually really critical. So the idea fundamentally being that a workshop, large or small, the gathering is just one key moment in a larger journey, and that you need to pay attention to all parts before and after to really build something that endures, has some stickiness, and hopefully some long-term meaning.
Awesome. Cool. I didn't see time passing. Thank you so much for sharing your experience, your thoughts.
Well, thank you very much for having me. I feel like that bad workshop attendee that's doing all the talking here, but I appreciate
that's why I invited you. It's not about me, it's about you.
Well, thank you very much.
Thank you for sharing. And I will put the URL to DoTank and to your LinkedIn profile in the show notes. I
appreciate that. That would be great.
Awesome.
All right. Thanks, Miriam.
Thank you.
Good talking with you. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye. Cheers. Thank you for staying tuned and listening to the show. I appreciate your attention, as I know how busy you are. If you enjoyed it, please subscribe and engage by sharing your comments and thoughts, and visit workshops.work to download the one-page summary. I'm looking forward to seeing you back at the next episode, and I wish you a fruitful day.